Tell me what your vision is for Humboldt County with this Cooperation Humboldt.
Well, Cooperation Humboldt is a local organization that is dedicated to proving that we can meet all our needs to live a rich and fulfilling life. Not just survive, but genuinely thrive without exploiting or oppressing anyone, without allowing anybody to exploit or oppress us, and that can be done in an ecologically sustainable way. So my vision for Cooperation Humboldt is to be one of many organizations serving as a catalyst to help transition into restructuring this society to create a peaceful, just, democratic, and ecologically sustainable world.
Well, I think it's pretty obvious that people understand that something's amiss, and people are looking for answers. They're looking for scapegoats, and we see demagogues rising, but no one's really coming out with, a blueprint of, hey, this is how we're going to do it. This is how we're going to shift. This is how we're going to improve your life. What are some of the things Cooperation Humboldt is proposing and helping assist with to make this happen?
So I'm absolutely going to answer that very specific question. And before I do, I'm going to take one step back.
Yep, absolutely.
Because I think it's important. As an organizer, I always think about goals, strategies, tactics. My goal, I am unflinching. I want to restructure this society. I am a peaceful revolutionary. So I say that for two reasons, Nate. Number one, because it's true. Because I think that this current society is fundamentally racist, sexist, and class oppressive. And as if that's not bad enough, and that is bad, as if that's not bad enough, literally the huge transnational corporations as instruments of destruction are going to destroy the planet that we depend upon for life itself. So my goal is to restructure society. The strategy is, what is the plan? What is the big picture blueprint? And then tactics are the specific things that you do in service of the strategy or the plan to achieve the goal. So if my goal is to restructure society, I don't want to jump right into the tactics, the things that we're going to do. I'd love to give your listeners a flavor for the strategy. And for us, the strategy is the plan. So we have a plan where we said, well, what are the things that people actually need? Well, we need housing. We need healthcare. We need food. We need a sustainable environment. We need meaningful, productive work. We need art and culture. Art and culture is not just an elective. It's not an add-on. Like, we need that. These are the things that we need.
We have a soul.
We have a soul. Yeah. We absolutely do. So we said, all right, so what are those things like? So how can we actually do those things right now before we wait for the glorious People's Revolution where we take over the state? How can we start doing it right here and right now? So part of our strategy is to actually create the new world within the shell of the old. In addition to that, I believe that we must involve media work, which is why I'm having this conversation with you, Nate. I don't want to just hate the media. I want to become the media. We've got to literally use every tool available to us because the corporate media lies to us. Because the corporate media is not a liberal media, but the corporate media is also not a conservative media. It is a corporate media. Its agenda is to sell eyeballs and ears to advertisers.
It's a war on consciousness, essentially.
It is indeed.
How I see it.
And Nate, before we began this interview, you mentioned Manufacturing Consent. And I'll just say to your listeners, it's a fantastic book, and there is a documentary film made by a dear friend of mine, Mark Akbar. You should check it out, and you will really see how it is that the ruling elite use a so-called free media to literally manufacture consent and change not necessarily what you think, but definitely form what you think about. And they really control us. So this is super important. So all to say, there must be a strategy around meeting our needs, but we also have to have a media strategy to get the message out. We have to have a legal strategy so that we actually change legal systems, because the problem is that the ruling elite have created legal doctrines that actually make fighting for justice illegal. They've legalized the oppression of people and the commodification of the world. Like almost every harm or abuse that we face in this country is done legally. Right. Because the legal system is used to codify and legitimize the oppression, the exploitation, etc. So we have to have a legal strategy. And if that's not bad enough, we have to have an electoral strategy. We have to engage electoral politics as well as social change work. One of the things that I tell people all the time, when I meet somebody who wants to do social change work, I try to find out how do they feel about electoral politics and mass movement work, right? Movement versus electoral politics. Most people will respond one of two ways. Either they'll say, oh man, got to be electoral politics because that's where the decisions are made. That mass movement stuff, that's really a waste of time because it's not actually codifying and winning victories and being able to actually change law. That's one approach. Another approach is, oh, are you kidding? It's obviously got to be mass movement. Electoral politics is for chumps. The game is rigged. Like mass movements and cultural change is the only way that changes ever happen. So screw elections like it's only mass movements. Right. Of course, the other side is saying, screw mass movements, it's only election. And here's the thing, Nate, they're both right. Which means they're both wrong, right? It's not an either or proposition.
Somewhere in the middle.
It's not even somewhere in the middle. I appreciate where you went with that, but I'm going to push you and say, no, it's not even in the middle. It's both true. We have to actually engage both electoral politics and mass movement work. We have to do them both authentically, right? Now, that's why as in electoral politics, I engage in candidate forums. I engage with people across party labels. I will use any tool in the toolbox available to authentically call for transformational change. And when I engage in mass movement work, I do it authentically and meeting people where they are and helping people to have the kind of consciousness and the awareness that we're living in a matrix. And the ruling elite have lied to all of us. And I don't have all of the answers. But one thing I do understand is, this lens of imperialism, white supremacy, capitalism, patriarchy, basically the idea of dominator culture rather than cooperator culture, this lens of power over rather than power with, this lens that says extract rather than regenerate. Like there's really two different worldviews at play, right? So I am using both electoral politics and mass movement work to shift the cultural expectation, to rise our aspirations, to actually, I hope, inspire people to believe that we can literally win a new world. So that's the plan.
Yeah.
Now we can talk about the tactics, the things that we do, right? So if it's true that people need food, if they need healthcare, if they need housing, if they need art and culture, we have created at Cooperation Humboldt different program areas under each of those issues of human needs. And we say, if anything is a human need, then in our society, that ought to be a right. It should not be a commodity that's bought and paid for at a profit, but the social contract should guarantee everybody gets enough food to eat. Everybody has adequate health care. Everybody has a decent place to live. Everybody has the privilege and the opportunity to engage in meaningful, productive work. So that's why in our program areas around food, for example, we have created something called Little Free Pantries, which is based very much on the Little Free libraries that I suspect you and your listeners already know about. Now imagine doing that with non-perishable food. Right? So we have, I think, 15 different locations across Eureka and Arcata, and one in Crescent City now, where people are sharing food freely.
Awesome.
And I can tell you, I've had some of the most powerful human-to-human conversations with houseless people in front of my house where there is a food pantry. And one time I remember vividly opening my gate, stepping out of the door, and there was a fellow with a blanket wrapped around him, and he was in the pantry, and he looked up at me, and I saw fear in his eyes, and he thought he had been caught doing something wrong. I could see it, right? And I immediately I locked eyes with him. I smiled. I said, good morning. I commented on the weather. I did my very best to just let him know, like, hey, howdy. Have a human-to-human connection with him. And I'll tell you, Nate, 3 minutes or less, I saw that person begin to relax, to step into his humanity,
Yeah.
to engage me in like a way that like I got so much more out of that conversation than he did.
It was healing for both of you. I'm
It was
sure.
healing for both of us, and it like I'm on the verge of tears remembering that story.
I don't think many of us can appreciate how alienating it might feel to believe that you are, the bottom of the rung of society. And I mean, he had fear in his eyes when he saw you, and you're there to help him.
I mean,
you
it was
set it up to help him, obviously.
right, and it was a beautiful experience for both of us,
good.
right? Like, so, and one of the things that I can tell your listeners, like, if you see people who are houseless or whatever, make eye contact and nod at them and just say howdy. Like, you will
Humanize them.
You will humanize them, and you will find your own humanity in doing that. So that little free pantry is, see what I mean? Like, that's a thing. It's only a thing.
Right.
Taken alone, is it revolutionary? Well, maybe not, but it can be if it's in service of a larger strategy that has the goal of making access to food as a fundamental human right. And if you go and look at our little free pantries, either online at www.cooperationhumboldt.org or find one of them on social media or even in the community, and you'll see we've got literature and language on sharing food and access to food as a human right. And so we're creating the cultural space to have those conversations. Cool. In addition to the little free pantries, under our food program area, we are beginning something that we call from front yards to gardens, right? It's a program in your front yard. We will come in and convert your front yard into an organic garden and a garden for native plants and pollinators.
Awesome.
But you have to be willing to not have a front fence. Let us put signage up that says this is available to the community. But wait, there's more, Nate. We also just this spring have finished planting 25 fruit trees all across Eureka and Arcata. But here's the catch. Every one of those trees was planted in a place where public access was available, and everybody where we planted it agreed that we could come up and put signage up to educate people about what kind of fruit it is, right, when to pick it, what it's all about. Here's the point. Everything in our food program is about creating our community as a food forest, to remind people that we come of this earth and that the indigenous people know what our ancestors who were once indigenous once knew, and that is the earth provides.
Well, it also adds resilience to a community when it's food production is decentralized, and we've had cases where Highway 101 is blocked by a landslide. If you're living in a food forest, there you go.
That's right.
Versus if you're relying on a semi-truck coming from Portland or the Bay Area.
So there you go, Nate. I want you to imagine how, like, that's the beginning seed, right?
Right.
What happens when we reach a genuine tipping point where more and more people are growing and sharing food, where more and more people are nurturing food out of our local ecosystem, and we literally do recreate a food forest? That's whenever it becomes revolutionary, right? The same thing we're doing with our support, for example, of public banking. I have the honor of serving on the executive committee of the California Alliance for Public Banking, where we are calling for the creation of a democratically controlled people's bank, and we take away the power to create our money from Wall Street billionaires and predators and put it where it belongs, the people themselves. I recently watched the documentary on the North Dakota bank. That's a public bank, and that was a pretty a revolutionary act, and it's still serving the state. And in fact, in the 2008 economic crisis, where the entire country was experiencing a huge credit crunch, there was only one state that did not experience a credit and money crisis. And I bet you know what state that is.
North Dakota.
North Dakota, because the public bank was functioning and was able to continue to make credit and money available. Because in our current society, as crazy as it is, money is treated as debt. Now, here's the point, Nate. When any public project that is created like that beautiful East Bay Bridge down in connecting San Francisco to Oakland. I love that bridge. It's a beautiful bit of architecture. Reminds me of what human beings are capable of, right? Yeah. It's amazing. We're incredibly bright species in some respects. Right.
We still have a shadow outside.
We do indeed, and maybe we'll get into that at some point. But here's the point. That bridge, we're told, cost $6 to $7 billion with a B. But actually, if you count the cost of the privilege of borrowing money to finance it, it becomes a $15 billion. The point is, every major infrastructure project costs virtually twice as much just for the privilege of borrowing the money to finance the project. And money is a construct. It was created by society. And for a lot of people, and myself included, the first time I heard that, I said, that's crazy. That's not true. Look it up. In fact, anybody who has ever bought a house, if you actually look to see how much you actually paid for that house versus what you thought you paid for the house, the privilege of borrowing money and the present value of money is astounding. So a public bank is a way to basically begin to assert our sovereign right.
Well, just to give people more clarity around that. So if you did get a loan from a state bank, say California had a state bank, they would still collect interest. Where would that go?
It would go to the people. It would go right back into it, right? Instead of the billionaire class.
Go into Wall Street and whatever they do with it, run the globe, start wars, whatever.
Right. The things that they do, right? Yeah. Predator's going to predate, right? Like, billionaire's going to billionate. Like,
and so it would be democratically run, so California residents would be able to vote on what happens with that money.
Absolutely.
And interest rates even.
Interest rates, the whole nine yards. Okay. I mean, again, I am a radical little d Democrat. I believe in democracy. Remember, demos the people, cratio rule. The people rule. The people have the power. For whatever reason, Nate, as a little boy, I bought that shit. Yeah. I can still remember when I was proud to be an American. For me, that's when I was about 8 years old, when I was taught that I was from the United States of America. And in the United States of America, we stood for liberty, justice, and equality. And not only that, but we stood for liberty, justice, and equality. And our country was a great shining light on the hill. And we were going to guarantee liberty, justice, and equality to the entire world. Nate, I was so proud to be from that country. And then I grew up and realized I had been lied to, that that's actually a myth. It's not how it works. It's not how it ever worked. But here's the thing. I have been, as I've grown older and hopefully more mature, have come to accept, all right, there's actually not an Easter bunny.
Yeah.
There's not a tooth fairy. And on the right day, I'm willing to entertain the possibility that maybe there's not a Santa Claus. But I'll tell you this, I refuse to accept that this is not going to be a democratic republic. I am going to fight to make that promise a reality. And I encourage your listeners to join us at Cooperation Humboldt. And let's actually make the promise of American democracy a reality, because it's not the world that we were born into, but it's the one we were promised. Right. So let's make it real.
Right. I appreciate that. And I'm a combat veteran, and I went over to Iraq to deliver democracy. There's nothing about it was democratic. I guess that's just where I'll go with it.
I will say this. First, congratulations on consciousness.
Yeah,
right?
Thank you. It was a hard road.
It is.
Yeah.
I presume that you probably know, and if not, I encourage you to check out Iraq Veterans Against the War.
Yeah, okay.
And I've got some colleagues there, and I know that the experience that people like you who are coming into awareness of like what you went through and what was done to you, right. That's real shit, Nate. And so
pretty criminal.
It is criminal. And you have every right to be righteously angry. And I also will tell you this and encourage your listeners to think about this. Anger is the appropriate response to injustice. But if you just stay angry and stew in it, it is corrosive. It's horrible. It's bad for you physically. It's bad for you emotionally. It's bad for you spiritually. The way that you can transform anger into righteous anger is to put it into action for justice. Yep. If you begin to act on your feelings of anger and injustice, and here's what's amazing. It's like fucking alchemy. It changes lead into gold. When you start to work for justice, you will rediscover your humanity, your joy, your compassion, all that good stuff. So allow the anger to spark you, but don't let it consume you.
Right. Good, great advice. Have we addressed housing?
We haven't, so I'm glad you did, because remember, our idea of housing is that housing should be a human right. Let's just name something. In the city of Eureka, there are more empty houses than there are houseless people. In the county of Humboldt, there are more houseless people, or there are more empty houses than there are houseless people. In the state of California, there are more empty houses than there are houseless people. In the United States of America, can you guess where I'm going with this?
Yeah.
There are more empty houses than there are houseless people. We don't actually have a housing crisis. What we have is a capitalism crisis. Housing is treated as a commodity to be bought and paid for at a profit rather than a human need to be fulfilled. So what we at Cooperation Humboldt say is we need to start talking about housing as a human right. We need to stop looking to capitalism as a way to be able to solve that problem. So for us, what we're doing is, first of all, in every one of our program areas, we look around and say, is there already people doing something? Because we want to lift that up. Like I want to lift up, for example, AHA, the affordable alternatives, housing alternatives, and they're doing phenomenal good work, especially trying to build a housing camp that is democratically run by houseless people. If you haven't interviewed the folks at AHA, would definitely encourage you to do that. So that one is like, great, we can point people to that. We're not going to try to do that. But you know what we are going to do is begin the process of exploring creating a worker-owned construction company that would target affordable housing as its principal income source.
Okay.
So for us, we're always about how do we actually do this? So and in terms of, we're also nurturing and exploring the idea of creating a community composting worker-owned cooperative. We are exploring creating a Humboldt Artist Guild for artists to own and operate a live-work studio space. So again, for us, all of these different sort of program areas have individual projects within them that say, what can we do to be value added to not just make people's lives better in a concrete and tangible way, but to shift the cultural conversation to transformation. Right. So that's how I would answer that question.
We're at the stage, I think everyone's aware of it if they watch the news in the most recent election, that things are shifting around. And a lot of it was rage from the working class. So tell me about working cooperatives and how you perceive change taking place to improve the lives of working people.
So I'm glad you actually brought that up in this conversation, Nate. And I'm going to take this head on and tell you this. If you want to know what's going to happen tomorrow, 9 times out of 10, what you do is look at what's happening today.
Yeah.
And if you really want to understand what's happening today, 9 times out of 10, look at yesterday, because history moves in patterns like this. That's true 99 times out of 100. The 1 in 100 are those moments of what Antonio Gramsci and others called conjuncture moments, where tensions have built to such a point that there's going to be a break, that things are not going to be able to continue the way we are. We are living in a global historic conjuncture.
Okay.
Capitalism as an economic system and the kind of democracy politically that we thought we grew up in is not going to continue. It can't. Capitalism is coming to an end because of the inherent contradictions of a system that assumes unlimited growth and unlimited resources on a finite planet.
Right.
It's the ideology of cancer, Nate.
I mean, you get people like Neil deGrasse Tyson who are like, well, maybe someday we'll mine asteroids and we're going to go to Mars. And for me, that just seems ludicrous. Like, why are we? I mean...
I mean, I will tell you this, that colonial and colonizer mindset is really part of the problem. I don't want to just continue to replicate horrific conditions, on another asteroid or on Mars. I'd prefer to actually return to Eden, which is where we are right now. But here's my point. Capitalism is destroying the planet because we are consuming resources faster than the earth can replenish it. And what really pisses me off, Nate, is most of the stuff that's being produced is just ending up in landfills, right?
Yeah.
Like it's not actually going about creating a good society, and it's only enriching like not even 1%, but the 0.01%, right? The true billionaire class is a tiny section.
Taxpayers generally pay the externalities of
absolutely
climate change, pollution,
all of it. And look, as a former combat veteran yourself, you know damn good and well that the U.S. empire is not a nation state empire. It's a corporate empire. Yeah. Now that corporate empire is paid for by tax dollars and the blood and the sweat of U.S. personnel and the blood and sweat of mostly black and brown skinned people who are victimized by it. But it's a corporate empire, right? It's not about America's interest.
We went overseas to secure oil rights, oil contracts, and
isn't it
corporate
something?
To the core. That's what keeps the gears of the economy moving.
The current
which
economy
feeds people and houses people. So I
have
understand a little bit of the logic, but why would you go to war? Why don't you just change yourself?
Look at what's happening in Venezuela. Have you ever noticed that it seems like the U.S. is constantly going to war to bring democracy only to oil-producing countries? Like, what the fuck is that all about? We know what it's about, right? All I'm getting at is this. Capitalism is ending because of its inherent contradictions. One of the contradictions that many people are beginning to understand is you can't just consume faster the natural world than can recreate and replenish. But here's another one. Even for the capitalist, this system is going to end. Why? Because if I am the capitalist, it benefits me, or it used to benefit me to put you to work so I could extract the surplus value of labor as my profit. Right. That's basic economics. So I put as many people to work as I can, not because I care about you and your family, but because I want to extract the surplus value of your labor, right? And I put other people to work. Can you guess why? To extract the surplus value of their labor. But with automation, robotics, and technology, the ruling class are not able to continue their mindless profit modality because labor is being replaced by robots. So if we had a democratic society, we would be cheering, oh my God, technology, automation.
It's lightened our load. It's taken the yoke off our backs. Awesome. I've had that thought before. I don't know why we aren't celebrating that more.
Well, because we're not in control.
Getting a cut, yeah.
Right, we're not getting a cut. And what's happening is more and more people are getting more and more desperate because we have a system where you have to sell your labor in order to get money so that you can buy the things that you need to survive, rather than sharing equitably the spoils of the technology and robotics and so forth. So again, I'm back to this. At the end of the day, capitalism is coming to an end, right? And here is the key. It's either going to emerge and morph into fascism or eco-socialism. There's no getting around it, Nate. We're going to have one or the other.
Took a fascist turn. I think that's what we're in, but it's waking people up.
It is, and I want to remind you and your listeners, when is the last time that fascism emerged? The 1930s. And why was that? I'll tell you why, Nate. Because society was morphing from an agrarian society to an industrial one, and everything was happening super fast. It was in a state of shift and transition and polarization. People needed a way to understand society and organize it, and the fascists have fascism is not totalitarianism. A cop beating you up is not fascist. That's abuse. That's totalitarianism, but it's not fascist. Fascist is an ideology about how to organize society around who is the we and who is the they, who gets taken care of and how. It's about how to do both politics and economics, right? Fascism has a very precise definition. That's the reason that fascism emerged in the 1930s. It's emerging now for the same reason we've already talked about. Society is morphing away from an industrial one to a digital, electromagnetic, however you describe the information age or whatever it is. The world that people are going to live in 10 to 20 years is not the world that I grew up in. It's just not going to be.
So going back to what has worked in the past isn't necessarily going to serve us in the future.
It just won't. So one of the things that I just understand is we have to have these conversations with enough people to realize that the ruling elite are lying to us. They have been lying to us. We actually there's enough to go around. That's the bottom line, Nate. There's enough for everybody to have really meaningful lives, to have all of their needs met. but it can't be done if you allow a small elite to hoard all the wealth, the money, and the decision-making authority. Think of it this way. If anybody was hoarding toilet paper the way the wealthy hoards money, we would recognize that to be a mental illness, right? And we would get them help. I mean, for God's sakes, there are television programs, right?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I feel compassion when people seem to be driven by the profit motive. It seems, or greed. It could be based out of fear.
Could be
like a fear consciousness, and then eventually it turns into a power trip.
There's a difference between judgment and assessment, right? So, I've got 18 years of sobriety as a recovering alcoholic, so I'm not going to judge people. Thank you very much. I normalize that conversation too. I'm not going to judge people, but I do assess things. And I'll tell you this. It may not be like if we had a just and compassionate society, the billionaire class and the 0.001%, we would actually recognize that they do have a mental illness and we would get them help. Instead, we put them in charge. So that's kind of our fault, right? So we really have to actually just come to terms with the fact that it's not like, I'm not like to the pitchforks because I want to punish people. I'm like, you're destroying the planet. You've got to be stopped.
This is where it always takes me back to Joseph Campbell and comes down to mythology.
Absolutely it does.
I mean, through the industrial age, it was the titans of industry that were pulling people out of abject poverty and improving the quality of life to a degree. So we learn to worship these people, and we want to emulate, and we want to put them in positions of power, because in our collective consciousness, these people are, they're the heroes. It's the hero.
Nate, and what would it be like if instead of like worshiping, titans of industry, or worshiping somebody because they can hit a baseball or shoot a basketball or do sports, or, are a good actress or actor, instead of emulating that, I want you to do a little thought experiment and imagine, and I'm going to encourage your listeners to do it with me. I want you to close your eyes and imagine living in a society where we see Nate scoop up a crying child and comfort and cuddle that child, and everybody else stops and goes, damn, look at Nate. Did you see that dude? Like he just swooped that kid up. He cuddled it. He made that child feel safe and protected. The child was crying. Now the child is happy and playing with Nate. That motherfucker, I'd like to be like Nate.
Yeah.
That little thought experiment, we could have that world.
Yeah. Yeah, it comes to the myth makers, the people that are providing the vision, and then the people that are grounded enough to actually provide the blueprint. I would think, I grew up Roman Catholic. I had my issues with the teachings and just that culture. But I would think that this message would be embraced by people who want to be in the world but not of it, and who have values that are very egalitarian and community-oriented. Have you ever seen in any of your political history or any of your, shaking hands on the street, any churches or organized faith-based groups that were pretty enthusiastic about these proposals and willing to take action?
Absolutely, yes.
You have, okay.
Absolutely, and my grandfather was a Baptist preacher, and I came out of that tradition, and so I have a lot of appreciation for that kind of call for compassion and kindness and grace. I would lift up, for example, you come out of the Roman Catholic tradition, Dorothy Day and the Catholic workers. I would equally lift up and encourage you and your listeners to check out Jim Wallace and Sojourners.
Okay.
There is in the work of Matthew Fox.
I'll post links to all these things
okay.
on my page.
I would encourage you to take a look at Marianne Williamson and some of her work. The reality is that there is a way to actually embrace these things both practically and spiritually. Because here's the thing. Whether you come at, we are interconnected.
Yeah.
And whether you come at that interconnectivity through hard science, or through eco-spiritualism, or like me, you say those are both true and both equally valid ways of understanding things. We are interconnected. And that's the reason that I am a Green Party member, Nate, because the fundamental values of peace, justice, democracy, and ecology is premised around the understanding of ecology means that we're all interconnected. Whatever we do to this web of life, we ultimately do to ourselves. So it's not just an emotional, spiritual part. It's in addition to that, it's also just cold, calculated reality about how science works. The commitment to social justice is things ought to be fair, and they're not. Our commitment to democracy is equally simple. Any decisions that affect your life, you ought to have an opportunity to help shape that decision. That's all democracy really means. And then lastly, a commitment to peace, which says if we want to create a peaceful world, the way you do it is by eschewing violence. Like you have to actually go about. Now, I'm not a pacifist. Right. I believe in the defense of myself and others, but I don't believe in using violence as an affirmative political tool. Right. I think that, I hate that phrase, the end justifies the means. My mama taught me a valuable lesson. She said, the means are the ends in the making. However you are acting is what you're going to end up. So,
Perfect distinction. That's a great lesson.
Right, isn't it? So all I'm saying is, for me, Nate, what I am attempting to do is to change the story. Right. I'm trying to change the story and to say, I don't think that what people want is just a bunch of more stuff. I think that what people want is meaningful, authentic connection. Yeah. We want to be valued. We want meaningful, productive work. We want to do productive things for which we are appreciated and acknowledged. Yes. So that's where I'm at, Nate, at Cooperation Humboldt. We're trying to create a solidarity economy here on the North Coast. We're trying to work on concrete projects that are tactically important ways to meet people's needs, doing it in service of a strategic plan that ultimately, literally changes the world.
Thank you for your time. How can people help in this?
Check us out online at www.cooperationhumboldt.org. If you're on Facebook, we have a Facebook page. We have Instagram. We have Twitter. We have all of the various ways. But really, come by and see us physically at 840 E Street. That's at the Labor Temple. We're in the basement of the Labor Temple. Come on by and knock on the door and let's have a conversation.
Cool. Thank you so much, David.
Thank you.